Hello and welcome to Solidarity, the Resource Center's podcast at UCSC. The purpose of Solidarity is to uplift the voices and actions of students who work at the Resource Centers or with student organizations. I'm Mark. I use he, him pronouns. I'm an intern at the ERC, will be hosting today's episode. Yuya, who is in the background, is the other ERC intern who helps with video editing and much needed tech support. Please note that the opinions and views expressed in the episode are of the individuals and do not necessarily reflect the views of the UCSC Resource Centers. Today's episode is titled Student Organizing 101. And to give a little background on today's episode, just going into my little monologue, UCSC has had a well-documented history of student organizing from the protests of the Vietnam War during the founding of the university in 1965 to more recent examples of student activism in 2015, where students organized against the increase of UC-wide tuition costs. And also with our current social political climate, many students are or might be wondering what it takes to start a student movement. So in today's episode, we're joined with three amazing UCSC grad students who are here to share with us their experiences with student organizing, from their firsthand experience with starting and maintaining a student movement to helping us understand the power behind student voices. And so going into intros, if whoever wants to go first, if they could just share their name, maybe any titles, as well as pronouns.
Hi, I'm Veronica Hamilton. I am a PhD student in social psychology. I use she, her, they pronouns, and I've been involved in community organizing in Santa Cruz for many years.
Hi, I'm Amanda Carbajal, and I'm also from molecular biology. I'm a fourth-year PhD student, and my roles are I help the Women's Center running the MINT program, as well as showing up in a different form of activism, which I'll talk about later. It's not your traditional sense, and it's definitely informed by my own identities as a woman of color, as a person with no generational wealth, and just a lot of these other intersecting identities.
Hi, I'm Jessie Suzuki. I use they pronouns. I'm a PhD student about to graduate from the Department of Molecular Cell and Developmental Biology. I'm a geneticist and a molecular biologist. I'm also an artist and an activist.
Cool. Thank you for that. And to help with our listeners who might not know about, who are more recent to the UCSC campus or just might not know about COLA, as well as the Student Researchers Union, as well as who might want to know more about our guest today, could y'all give us a short little history on COLA, the Student Researchers Union, as well as a little bit more background on yourself?
I could start by talking about the history of COLA. So I have been involved with organizing with the UAW, which is the Graduate Student Research Union that represents teaching assistants, tutors, readers. And we signed a contract in 2018. Through our union, we bargain, we negotiate the terms of our employment. And we signed a contract, our statewide union signed a contract in 2018, which our campus was pretty firmly voted against. And the reason we voted against it is because of the really intense housing crisis in Santa Cruz that is in some ways worse than other UC campuses. So the COLA movement came from some anger around the contract in 2018, some anger around the failed rent control measure in 2018, and then just broadly a desperate need for a change in our conditions. So probably most students who are listening are aware of how horrible it is to try to find housing, and not just housing, but affordable housing in Santa Cruz. And we were interested, some of the organizers that were part of the early stages of COLA were interested in trying to find a way to either increase our wages or address the escalating rents in Santa Cruz. And COLA was meant to address the sort of our low wages. So we started off by trying to take advantage, as a group of people who were angry about the conditions that we were under, that we couldn't afford to live where we work. We took advantage of different organizations, like, for example, the Graduate Student Association and the UAW official positions in the UAW, to try to use those as leverage to build power for a broader movement of student workers and just generally students and those in solidarity to fight for higher wages, or a cost of living adjustment, which is what COLA stands for. So that is what built up to what ended up being a very long, intense, and in many ways effective strike. We went on strike at the end of 2019, where hundreds of graduate students withheld final grades. We did all of the work that we are paid to do, which is teaching, grading, advising, but we just didn't submit those final grades. And, close to 100 people still didn't submit grades until about 5 months later. We also had a 4 to 5 week long picket line, which concluded at the beginning of the pandemic. We had national news coverage. We had the entire campus sort of seized by the conversation of the cost of living in Santa Cruz and the impact of that on graduate students. We had a very, very vocal, loud, and in many ways effective campaign, but it's not over. So we're still working on that.
And Jesse, would you like to give, Jesse, would you like to give a little bit more background and history on the Student Researchers Union?
When the University of California was formed, it was written into the state constitution. And one of the lines in there said that the researchers at the University of California were not allowed to unionize. We weren't allowed to do any kind of collective bargaining. And so there was a very, very long campaign, over 20 years, of people trying to get that overturned and putting a lot of effort into it. It came close to getting signed many times, didn't get signed each time for various reasons. I happened to be working on it when it finally made it past the line and got approved. And so I was campaigning for it beforehand. I went and testified in front of the subcommittee on higher education in Sacramento, and it was just chance that I got to be there for the big win that we made it across the line. So that gave student researchers at University of California the opportunity to unionize, but it took a few more years to get that going. So one of the issues, following what Veronica just told us about in the COLA strike, is that some people were kind of dissatisfied with UAW. They were worried that they wouldn't be represented. They were worried that our voice would get lost statewide. I didn't really hear anyone with a good solution to that. And so eventually it was like, okay, the thing that makes the most sense is for us to unionize with UAW. And so then that effort started, and we collected signatures. And then there was this, the UC could we got a supermajority of researchers in California to sign union authorization cards. You only need a majority, but the UC decided to fight us because we are inherently a temporary workforce. They know that if they just stall, people will graduate out. And so it has already happened. Some of the leadership has graduated out. But so there was a pushback, and I got to be part of the mediation efforts with PERB, the Public Employees Relation Board, where the union lawyers were pushing back against the UC lawyers' kind of ridiculous claims about why we shouldn't be allowed to have a union. And we just also achieved that in December 8th. And so now we have a union, and we're going to be able, for the first time in our history, bargain for our next contract. And yeah.
Cool. Very, very exciting. And Amanda, would you like to speak about your background?
Yeah, so I think Veronica and Jesse did a really great job of outlining the history and the movement with respect to its presence at UCSC. I guess my lens is I showed up for a PhD and then saw that first paycheck, and I thought, okay, the amount of work I'm doing, how am I going to pay my rent? And so from the get-go, I started in 2018. I just started hustling and working a lot. I've worked almost full time at other jobs the entire time I've done my PhD, and it is hard. And I, had so much respect. I was learning so much about the union and COLA from my colleagues in MCD and other departments. And even though my time was limited, it was so inspiring and so important that I had to make some time and some effort to help out in whatever ways I could. And so I was really excited to help out by showing up to some strikes when I could and marching. Like we marched to Lori's house on campus a couple of times, and then I was able to do a Zoom call with Senator Cortese. I forget if that's how you say his name, with his aide, basically to try to convince him to write letters on behalf of students. So we did a couple of those calls. And it's just been really awesome to see that. But I do want to say that I think a lot more students would be involved if they had more bandwidth, because it can be really emotionally draining. And of course, it takes time. And so I know a lot of other students have a lot of other commitments. And I do want to address that there is some pushback within students, right? You have that slice of students that have generational wealth that are not affected, right? Because there's this unspoken expectation that you knew what you were getting involved with. You already should have known that a PhD was hard. So why are you all complaining? What's the point? You knew about this, right? And so there's these lingering thoughts that help kind of put wedges and can make it just a bit more challenging than it already is. But I'm very hopeful, and as we'll talk more about some of that stuff, you'll see more about it.
Yeah, definitely great segue onto our next question. But a lot of students, as we're gonna kind of touch upon later in this episode, we hope a lot of our listeners get to see a part of their own identity and some of our guests today, and they're gonna, explain or kind of illustrate a lot of the challenges that they've faced when organizing, and hopefully that gives our listeners a bit of a better understanding of like, oh, this is how I should approach, Anyways, but amazing segue. Moving on to our next question. Let me give you 4 seconds. So what was the catalyst or deciding factor for y'all, like specifically your involvement in the COLA strikes? Or yeah. And whoever wants to start can go. I think I see Veronica.
Yeah, I'd be happy to talk about that. I mean, I've been involved in organizing, and specifically around union or labor organizing in Santa Cruz for a little while. I'm also the daughter of a carpenter, a unionized carpenter. My mom was a carpenter. And so I had already been in a place where I knew that strikes were important. I did my undergrad at UCSC. I knew how valuable students are to labor strikes on our campus. Students can shut down the campus in ways that workers have a harder time doing. So I had already had a deep appreciation for strikes. Although, to be honest, as we were moving toward a strike, I was really scared. But I could speak to that maybe in another kind of context. But My catalyst for being involved with this is sort of a long slope. But when the strikes happened, my partner was unemployed. I was still recovering from a surgery that I had. So I had medical bills. I was working. I also had a job outside of my graduate program. I am somebody who gives money to my family members. I was in a place where personally I was struggling, and though I get some financial support from my partner when he eventually became employed, I am often thinking about, as a woman, I can't rely on somebody else's income. That's really harmful to relationships. And it's really important, I think, especially people who grow up working class, it's really important to try to figure out how to be independent, because you never know when you'll be forced to do that. So I was personally motivated from those circumstances, but also from the circumstances of people who are my colleagues. I think that academia is an institution which sort of values and reinforces white supremacy. And they do that through the ways that they sort of perpetuate racial capitalism. They make the highest paying jobs ones which are sort of gate-kept from people of color, in particular Black, Brown, and Indigenous people, and also people from just low economic backgrounds. So it was just sort of the culmination of seeing how these circumstances were completely unfair, were perpetuating harmful systems of inequality. And in my own life, it felt like I need to make sure that I'll be okay. So it was a broad array of things that sort of drove my passion for being a part of COLA. I was personally scared because when you do things like going on strike, and the position that I was in as the union leader at the time, it's really scary to take those risks. And something like the COLA strike meant that we were, it meant that we would have to commit fully. And it was going to take all of our attention, all of our time until we were done, which it did for a long time. But that's how I got involved. That was my inspiration for that.
And Amanda, would you like to go next on the catalyst?
Sure. I think for me, the catalyst was it was not really a catalyst, maybe. I had been seeing colleagues and other folks talking about COLA. And of course, I already was living the reality of these inequities and how messed up it is that I felt like I was set up to fail and felt like I was going to drop out pretty much every quarter. But I think for me, it was a little bit harder to get involved because I already had established a not so favorable reputation for myself with faculty in my department for other reasons that had nothing to do with COLA, but that were very linked to classism, sexism, and white supremacy. So I kind of actually tried to avoid getting involved for a bit just because I kept saying, like, I don't have time and there's already great people doing great stuff. But then I really started to get more and more inspired and felt compelled to really just carve out some time and effort toward the latter part of February of 2020, so right before the pandemic. And I do think seeing more people in my department that I had interacted with and knew and respected also really played a role. And also just thinking about the long-term effects, like if we can do this now, like people in the future, there's going to be a better group of people or a more diverse group of people that can benefit from this. So just really weighing the full impact of what was going on and trying to understand it was really what pushed all these things together, or what really pushed me to do something. Even though I will, of course, full disclosure, it was limited, but I still tried when I could.
So I think that I like how Veronica explained it as this kind of like long, slow slope, because I also come from a very active pro-labor family. And so, my parents took me to strikes when I was a kid and, that sort of thing. So it was, if somebody is on strike, basically I'm in solidarity. And so starting the first quarter that I was here, the janitorial staff went on strike. And so I didn't, I don't, actually the first time I ever crossed a picket line in my life was during COLA. But I didn't cross the picket line in the whole time that I was, the first 3 years that I was here, and incurring a bit of cost in terms of not not coming in for things that I was responsible for. But I think that unlike Amanda, I maybe had some personal capital to spend at the beginning of COLA. I had done a lot of service things for the department, and I had built a lot of connections with people, and so I've maybe spent some of that now. I don't know that I have it anymore. But I had a bit of goodwill built up. And part of what happened, so I'm an MCD bio, and we are not well paid, as anybody can tell you, but we're paid much better than the TAs. So I almost my entire time at UCSC, I've been paid as a researcher every quarter. And when I do work as a TA, my PI, my advisor, who I work in his laboratory, and he owns all my data, and he's on all of my papers, he tops up my salary so that I'm at the researcher salary. And so essentially, if you have somebody who's working 3 quarters as a TA and they're trying to survive on that versus me working 4 quarters as a researcher, I get paid twice as much. And so I knew how much I was struggling. And at the time, I was living in a house with 4 other grad students. We had someone in the garage, we had someone out in the front, living in a van. We were crammed into this house, and they were, we were half and half kind of STEM and humanities. And so it made me much more aware of the financial disparity, which I hadn't really been aware of. And a friend of mine from home came to UCSC. He was interviewing, and he was looking at coming here for grad school, which I really wanted him to do. I was like, if you come here, more of our friends will come visit. This will be awesome. I'll have someone from home here. And when I realized what his financial situation was going to be, I said, don't come here. You are going to be destitute. You are going to be sharing a bedroom with another grown man. Like, don't do it. And so that was kind of my awareness of just how bad it was. So when my first interaction with this, with the Wildcat strike and with the COLA movement was, I think, in December. And I had been kind of thinking for a while that it was kind of it's a messed up situation, and that I had felt like there was nothing I could do. And so suddenly, okay, well, here's something I can do. Here's a group of people who are doing something about it. So it was, I had been waiting for that opportunity. And the first thing that I went to, I remember I went up to Carlos Cruz, and I said, I have to tell you how much money I make. I was like, this is how much money we make in my department. Like, just to try and communicate what was going on. And actually, I think that we're going to talk about it later, but it was one of the problems getting people involved from the departments that make more money. And so, Amanda was one of the people who got involved from our department. But a lot of people, they're just under less pressure. So they have more to lose. They're under less pressure to change things, and it was harder to get them out. But I was looking for a way, and so I found it.
Explain the importance of student organizing, more specifically, as I think, Veronica, you kind of touched upon it, what was your experience with understanding the importance of student voices? Well, I kind of think y'all all kind of touched upon it, but anyways, and whoever wants to start off, I think let's mix it up. Jesse, would you like to start us off with that one then?
Yeah. To the extent that college prepares you for life, that school is supposed to prepare you for life, I think that in real life, out in the not in school world, there is a huge need for solidarity and for labor action, and for not like a shallow kind of solidarity, not like a shallow kind of we'll pull together for a second, but really getting what that looks like and how that works. And one thing that I noticed is that a lot of folks who were active in COLA had previously been active in the Occupy movement. And I think that you really, practice makes improvement, like to the extent that you are in school learning how to move powerfully and in an informed manner through the world. This is part of your education.
I think for me, what's been really eye-opening is that I think for the most part, or at least in the people I knew in my department, a lot of us had this understanding of just how messed up the system is, right? We all acknowledged the validity of the COLA strike even before it started. But all we did was, what we could, which was complain to each other, vent, and that's valid and it's important. But if you really need something to change, it's the organizing component that's going to be allowed to leverage your complaints. And it was that epiphany for me personally that helped me get involved. And I think, as Jesse mentioned, a lot of other folks, when they're not in a bind, or they're not even at step one of like, I need to vent and complain, this is really a terrible situation, they're not going to buy in to be part of the leveraging piece to really do something about it. And so student organizing is kind of the culmination of all of these other factors that are so essential for change. But if you don't have them all, it can really impede the change that happens. And so in the context of undergrads, they're affected if their TAs are overworked and expected to do a lot of more than 20 hours of research and still show up for them, right? As far as the whole integrity of UCSC or any school in providing quality education, just right there, that's an argument. Your undergrads that are paying all this tuition aren't getting it because your employees, non-employees, are exhausted. And so, yeah, that was really the whole thing that I was thinking about the whole time. And I think a lot of other folks were too.
Yeah. And that's kind of good-ish segue over to Veronica, who I believe in our meetings, we kind of talked about the importance of undergrads more specifically, on like this power that they have in their voice. But anyways, you go ahead and
so as I said a little bit earlier, I was an undergrad at UCSC. I got involved in student organizing. I graduated in 5 years. So maybe my third year I got involved in student organizing. So I have like a personal relationship with the value of student organizing, both, personally, it enriched my life so much that like all areas of my life improved. I got straight A's after I started going into student organizing. You develop a community, which is sort of invaluable. It just, all the colors are more vibrant, all of these things, like it can be just like on a personal level, just like very meaningful, very fulfilling. But when you think about the university, and talking about undergraduate organizing specifically, I think COLA in many ways was a student worker action. And it's important to think about ourselves and understand ourselves as workers in terms of our relationship to the university as graduate students. But undergraduates are, as the university is becoming more and more like a business, or is understood even sometimes explicitly as a business, it's important to remember that undergrads would be the consumer. and that the university sees itself as sort of responsible to the consumer and responsible to protecting the profits of the university. So tuition or room and board. So all this money that you're spending, or you're taking out loans, and then one day you'll be so sad when you get those bills, assuming that a large action won't come to end student debt. It's important to remember, like, that's not natural. That's not how it has to be. There are ways that can change, but it only changes when people push back. So there are a lot of things going on at the university that are unacceptable. It's unacceptable that so many workers are not paid living wages, and so therefore can't really contribute to the ultimate vision or the sort of non-capital vision of the university as a place of learning, a place of growth, in the production of knowledge. It's unacceptable that workers can't contribute to that vision that they probably were drawn to. It's unacceptable that, the university says that graduate students should just apply for food stamps and other governmental assistance rather than just paying us a living wage. It's unacceptable to see the sort of like racial divide in the labor force at the university, that there are so few people who can live in a way that's comfortable that are people of color. That's unacceptable. There's so many things that are unacceptable at the university. It's unacceptable that students are paying, so many thousands of dollars in tuition for Zoom University. It's, there are so many things that are unacceptable. And the university only changes when undergraduates and labor demonstrate that the university cannot continue unless they change what is unacceptable. So undergrads have a lot of power, but undergrads are also like really burdened on their time as they sort of transition. For many who are sort of traditional age students, as they transition to adulthood, and those who are sort of non-traditional age as they also take care of other responsibilities in their lives, like maybe their families, are burdened time-wise and financially. That keeps them from organizing. But as Amanda described, once you're able to carve it in, once you're able to get some movement, it's sort of sky's the limit. We could do so much. And COLA was a really great example of like how much we can push the university once we get going. And I think if the pandemic hadn't happened, we would have seen it go even further as other campuses were joining the strike. Berkeley was about to join the strike, or they did join the strike right when shelter in place happened. And the university as a business model cares about UC Berkeley and UCLA as profit centers. Anyway, all of that to say, undergrads have a lot of power, and they may not realize that with like really strong organizing, we can change a lot.
Thank you. Thank y'all so much. I think a large chunk of our audience are undergrads, and the ones who do tend to listen to this podcast tend to be more active politically usually. So this definitely helps them understand, or like helps bring other issues that might be happening around campus or like within their environments into their consciousness. And just that little discussion that we had just there definitely, well, to me, definitely helped me with like, oh, this is like, as undergrads, we do have a voice, and like, the university has given us a certain set of skills that can definitely help in any way that we can. But in saying that, let's move on to question number 4. Oh,
Mark, can I say something about that?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
If you have an opponent who has a lot of power, if you can just convince them that they don't have any power, then you've already won. And I think that we see that a lot with labor organizing, that it's not that somebody doesn't have power, it's that other people have put a lot of effort into convincing them that they don't. And so when workers realize the power that they have, they're like, this was here all along. This is amazing. And so I think that once people have seen it, once they flexed it a little bit, it starts to become really difficult to convince them that they don't have power.
Yeah. So definitely a little tidbit from this episode to y'all listening. Carve out a little time, see if you can flex a little, and once you get a better understanding of that, let's see what happens. Anyways, moving on to question 4. We kind of touched upon this in that last question, but how do you build a student labor movement? More specifically, what did y'all do, like specifically that helped gain support with your peers, or just help gain support for your movement? And that's good. I don't think Amanda has started one of them yet. So Amanda, would you like to start if you want?
Sure. So I would say that my circumstance was a little different and that I didn't have a lot of bandwidth or time. But I'd say my personality, I'm very introverted, like talking to strangers, not my thing, or even talking to people I know, maybe not really my thing either, unless I, have to. And I'm really sensitive. So like if I don't get invited somewhere, sometimes I get sad, but I wouldn't have gone anyway. And so then, so just this anxiety of like interaction, I realized that I had to get over it. And I actually was thinking about Fred Hampton and the Black Panthers, right? So part of why, just this quick aside, right, why the FBI was so angry about him and why he was so effective at such a young age and like really giving the government a run for its money is he talked to everyone. He went to a KKK rally, he went to the Confederates, he went to the Latinos and the Asians, and he was like, we are all mad about the same thing. So let's just get together, even though we have these other differences, right? And that's why he had a lot of power and leverage. And so thinking about that idea, like you have to actually talk to people and you have to actually make time, because every person that you talk to could be a potential, could have a potential trickle effect. That was something that I saw in real time. Again, the people in my department doing those conversations, making that time. I was like, yes, all of this put together helped me think, if I'm going to build my little slice of contribution to the student labor movement, I'm going to talk to people. So I started to get involved with recruiting and putting on some of those events like, volunteering. But then as soon as those people accepted, their admission to UCSC, I'd be like, here's this union card. Here you go. Like, you got to fill this out. Where are your friends? So just kind of thinking to, put aside like your personality, your personal like anxieties about interactions or whatever. Plus it was a pandemic, right? So just to reiterate, to build a student labor movement, you need to put in effort, right? See the cause is greater than your own small bubble of comfort, and just be very intentional. And I think being honest, right? Being very transparent, like having kind of awkward conversations with some folks who are just like, I'm not going to sign this, and being like, why not? Because let me tell you about some situations, right? So just kind of being okay with that. And I do think that it helped gain support. And again, I can't stress enough how inspiring, I guess I say that word a lot, but motivating to see other people do that too. So I didn't feel like, oh man, I'm just trying out of thin air and it's not going anywhere. So now I can like safely retreat, if that makes sense.
Thank you for that. And Veronica, would you like to go next?
For building a broader social movement, or how do you begin a student movement, I would say you start with what are the things that people complain about the most. And I know in our department, anytime we had like potential graduate students visiting, we're like trying to sell the department like, wow, this program is so great because X, Y, or Z. And then once once graduate students had them alone, then we're saying, keep in mind, we don't get paid hardly at all. You might be homeless. You need to start looking for housing now, you know, like having those conversations in quiet, or, you know, I think because of the ways that we think about meritocracy in the United States, people they didn't think that those should be louder conversations, but they were just happening so frequently. And so we knew, I mean, organizers knew, just as anybody else did, that this was a really important issue, one that we're hearing in so many contexts, and one that would like catch. So you focus on issues that'll catch, ones that like, you think about like, even those who would not normally get involved, would they care about this? And that's usually a good tagline. I think once you have people caught, I don't mean to sort of sound dehumanizing about that, but more to think about like, once you have an issue that like really captures people's attention and a lot of people already have buy-in for, that is also like a really important moment to build in like solidarity, as Amanda was talking about Fred Hampton. Once there's an issue that a lot of people are sort of down to fight for, then you also make sure that you're talking about some of these other sort of solidarity or intersecting issues. And I think it's really important to talk about the People's Coalition and how they contributed to the broader COLA movement. The People's Coalition was sort of founded by representatives, you know, maybe not officially from resource centers, but a lot of people who are involved in the resource centers on campus also joined People's Coalition and talked about the intersection between, you know, the violence of the university and imperialism, the violence of the university and white supremacy, or in patriarchy, or in, you know, broader systems of inequality and oppression. And so I think it's important that you know, maybe you have a broad message that there's a lot of buy-in for, and you make sure once people are there, you're talking about how it's a systemic issue, how solidarity needs to be built in, and how we all sort of like are fighting for the same thing, even if this is the first time you're hearing about it, kind of thing. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you. And Jesse?
So so Amanda was talking about being introverted and not liking to talk to people, and I think that I'm pretty extroverted. That thing about like, oh, I wasn't invited. I've already invited myself. It's fine. Like, so when I think about, you know, I mentioned earlier the kind of, you know, social capital that I had to spend. To me, I'm never-endingly moving through the world on a mission of community building. It's not just for COLA, it's for a million things. For if somebody has a disability that's not being supported, you know, there's so many different ways in which people fall through the cracks, in which people are not caught in the social net. And so from day one, I'm always going to be trying to connect with people, to connect them to each other, to have open dialogue. And I think that for me, whatever I have been able to do to contribute to the student labor movement while I've been a graduate student has been the biggest thing that I have to offer is my connection to community that I have, you know, that I've built and I've been a part of. And so when it's time to have a conversation with somebody about why we should sign the union authorization card, or it's time to ask people if they'll come march with us down to the base of campus to support the COLA strikers, even though this person isn't a TA and never has to TA again through graduate school, I'm not going in cold. I'm going in, I've already connected with this person. I've already invested in them. And I didn't do that so that I could get something later. I did that because I think that that's just a human thing that we need. And in terms of, you know, one of the first things that I did, I think that was very public, that started to cost me something, was at there was a recruitment event for PhD students, and I didn't wait until the PIs weren't there. So in science, we have a poster session, and so you show a poster of your research that you've been working on, and you discuss, you know, how research works in your lab. So I signed up for it. I was right up in front, but I didn't have a poster about my research. I had a poster about housing costs in Santa Cruz and about the history of the efforts to try and address that. And I was right up in front, and these professors kept coming by and being like, the fuck are you doing? Like, and I was like, hi, would you like to know what the, hey, I'm calling them by name. And some of them didn't come up. They stood 10 feet away and looked and then just walked away. And some of them still haven't talked to me. I don't know. But for the professors who came over and talked, some of them wound up becoming allies and becoming, more or less. I don't think that anybody in my department, any of the PIs, was super active or supportive, but maybe a little less hostile and maybe a little further along in the conversation. And what wound up happening is that the recruits all saw it. The recruits all saw this poster. They saw that I was front and center. And they were part of the conversation. And so the recruits vote for their favorite posters, and then that person gets an award. And so I think the top poster had like 20 votes or something like that. And our poster had like 45. So over and over again, these recruits were like, thank you for having this. This is important to me. And so we were able to use that in the discussions in my department, because we're data people. And so we were able to say, this is important to recruits. And when in those one-on-one conversations, we said, hey, if you decide to come here for graduate school or not, in your letter where you accept or reject, can you just mention that housing played a part in your decision? I mean, if that's true, I'm not asking you to put something in there that's not true, but if you're not going to come here, we just mention that the disparity between our pay and our rent was part of why you didn't come. And if you do accept, just say that it was a consideration, that you love the science so much that you're willing to look, you're going to try and work it out. And they did. And that was super helpful. So yeah, that's
so rad. Anyways, moving on to question 5. We really touched upon this, and then I kind of said that we would talk upon this later on in the episode, and now we're here. But anyways, what were some unexpected roadblocks, or I guess learning curves, that you encountered when building a student movement? And I think, Amanda, would you like to start us off with this one?
Sure. Just to kind of recap what I think other folks are saying. Just you either have like good reactions and people who care and want to participate, or folks that are a little apathetic. But there were some that, not even just in at UCSC, but this whole idea again of like, you knew what you were signing up for. You're a student. Like, why do you expect to get paid? And then you're explaining, because we do work. And they're like, no, but you knew it. You knew it. And we did it, right? Like some faculty that I talked to were like, well, we handled it when we were in your position. I'm like, yeah, but the dollar was way stronger. Like we're in the worst economic ratio of things I don't really understand, but I know it's bad. Right? Like all those memes of you can buy a house when you're 30 on your salary from the grocery store, or whatever. And so there's these false equivalencies, and just personally for me, the frustration and the ignorance, sometimes like it just gets you down, right? And so roadblocks for me were just many times where I thought like I know this is important. I know we need all hands on deck, but I feel really tired in every way about this. And so, I would feel pretty guilty about showing up for some things and not other things. And it just took a little bit of navigation to say, you know what, it's okay. I'm just doing what I can. And I'll just keep doing it that way. Again, just to recap, the roadblocks were dealing with the responses that are just not viewing the whole situation as a whole, and burning, lowering my own coffin, so to speak, lower and lower already on top of the other things that I had already, done politically in my department. Adding another nail to that. but it was worth it. But it's a double-edged sword.
And Veronica, would you like to go next?
Yeah, sure. I would maybe just another piece of what Amanda's talking about is burnout. I think when you get involved in student organizing, or when you get involved in anything, but student organizing, as Jesse's talked about, involves spending some of your social capital, sometimes other forms of capital too. It means, especially if things pick up as they did with COLA, it means more and more time is needed. It means that you're having more and more difficult conversations. I know with COLA, as with many other sort of student organizing that happens on our campus, particularly in Santa Cruz, we deal with whiteness in organizing, which can be exhausting. And I know that I hear students of color and organizers of color talking about how that contributes to burnout. So it's something that, should always sort of be on your mind. Once you burn out, there are some pretty major consequences. I got really sick after COLA. I know a lot of people had to take a lot of time to sort of recover. So it's something to really be thinking about. It's like, how do we avoid burning out? And for those of us, I was in a position where I couldn't take more breaks than I already was, and I wasn't taking hardly any. You just got to figure out, like, okay, well, if you can't take a break, how else can we get support? You got to make sure that you have community and people to sort of lean on. And if you're going to be like in the trenches, who's going to be there with you and try and get support, just like socially, if not in the other ways that you really need it. I think if I didn't have some of the people who I was really close with during the COLA strikes, I would have lost it. I would have really lost it. So I think it's really valuable to make sure that you've got like friendship, community, other sorts of like bonds to help work through that burnout. And then also, to the degree that it's possible, take breaks and figure out like what is capacity and what can we actually do and what really we can't. I think that's really valuable. So thinking about burnout as it relates to time commitment, as it relates to, whiteness, especially in Santa Cruz, as it relates to the sort of social energy or the spending of all the different kinds of capital that you have to do when you're in the fight, in the struggle.
Thank you. And Jesse, would you like to go next on certain roadblocks that you experienced?
Yeah, I have a bunch of thoughts about this. So I want to talk about a little bit about burnout, because I worked in public education for 14 years. And during that time, I got burned out to the point of I'm going to have to quit multiple times. And every single time it was the same thing, that I had been giving 100% for so long that I was like, I have to leave. And I would get to this point where I say, if I give you $1 a day for 2 weeks, and then, for 3 months, whatever, for a year, and then I can't handle it anymore and I quit, that is not as valuable as if I give you 70 cents for the rest of my life. And so I was like, my 70% is very valuable and it is a useful contribution. C's get degrees. Like, this is what I'm doing. I'm not trying to be the A+, bestest activist ever in the entire world or whatever it is. I want to perform at a level that allows me to stay in the fight for a long time. And you don't always see, I've been super lucky during my time here at UCSC that I've been able to see things come to fruition, but that's not always the case. A lot of activism is a long slog. And if you burn yourself out spinning your wheels as fast as you can, you're not going to be in it for the long term, and you are more valuable in the long term. That long-term effort is much better for the movement. And so I think it's the best thing for the movement for you to not burn out. So it's worth it. So that's one thing. Another thing is that, so a lot of my activism here has been trying to get scientists to be more activist. And that is challenging for a bunch of reasons. One, we are supposed to be apolitical. It's not just an accident, it's a value. staying out of the world and kind of staying at your bench and working is considered a good thing. And I struggle with that a lot. I've been very frustrated at my colleagues a lot, because you have this situation where the world says, quick, we need that work. We need that thing that you've been working on. So I have this weird conflict, because on the one hand, I think that it's valuable that researchers stay focused on their research, but I also think that it's harmful. So I think that I have this idea of the ratio of how much you should be focused on your work and how much you should be part of being part of activism, being part of the world, being aware of things. And the ratio has shifted a little bit. I think that I am less frustrated at my colleagues, but I still think that as scientists, we need to get more involved. And so I'm seeing that shift. I'm seeing people get more involved. I'm seeing people realize that staying out of it is still making a choice, that staying out of things is still, supporting the status quo in a lot of ways. And so I think that I have complicated feelings about it, but in particular, it's hard to organize scientists because we're supposed to stay out of things. So that's one thing. The other thing, I don't know if this is too long. You can edit it later if I'm talking too long.
Go for it.
The other thing that I really found, just in terms of a challenge and roadblock, is that during COLA, it became really evident to me that folks in the humanities do not use the same language that folks in STEM do. And it was a very big learning barrier for me. I can't tell you, I was learning so much terminology. And part of the challenge of organizing STEM folks to come be a part of a movement that was all conducted in humanities speak, they would get there and they wouldn't be able to understand what the heck was going on. Like that, just each sentence, each word, in STEM, there's a really, really intense requirement that you be brief whenever you speak, whenever you explain yourself, that you digest it ahead of time so that you can be very, very compact. And that's not the case. That's not what folks would see when they would come down there and they would hear a speech. And so I had to learn enough of the kind of humanities speak to be able to translate it to the STEM folks, to say this is what they're trying to say, to prep them ahead of time to say this is what the deal is. And so that was definitely a big learning curve for me, is just different disciplines having such different language that they use to talk about these issues. It's not that STEM folks don't ever talk about it, although obviously, like I said, we don't talk about it as much. But when we do, we use different terms, different focus than folks who this is, their area of study.
Thank you all for that. This was definitely a question that I wanted to ask. I mean, I kind of talked about it earlier, where so our listeners can both see themselves in you and y'all, and know accordingly, or how to navigate that specific situation. But the whole topic, or the topic of burnout more specifically, and how student movements are more of a marathon, less so a sprint, is something that I think a lot of up and coming, or folks that are interested in potentially becoming more active definitely need to consider as well. But anyways, moving on to question 6. I'm just going to go ahead and ask the question, and y'all can go, take it whichever way. But how or what does success look like in regards of the COLA strikes, and what do you think is still needed to get there? This was written before the most recent post on Instagram and the whole discussion going on. But Jesse, would you like to start us off with this one?
Yeah, I think that when we talked about this before, I was general strike, universal basic income, single payer healthcare, downfall of capitalism, build healthy and sustainable structures. I think that, this is kind of what I mentioned before, that we have a lot of battles ahead of us. We have a lot of intersecting problems that require overhaul of systems. So to me, if if we grad students get a cost of living adjustment, I'm in favor of that. But, you know, part of what the People's Coalition was pushing for is it's not just graduate students. You know, I worked at I stopped during the pandemic. Well, the dinner stopped, but so I was working at a place where we do a dinner for homeless people on, you know, Monday nights, and a bunch of the folks from there showed up, and you know, they were there in support of COLA, in support of housing reform. But if the graduate students get our cost of living adjustment, that doesn't help those folks any. I mean, to me, a really successful, what I'm aiming for, what I would like, is something that would lift them up also. So I go real big with that question. Maybe too big.
Amanda, would you like to go next on that one?
Sure. Jesse's absolutely right about that. I also was surprised when I heard some counter arguments for COLA, but once I heard them, it made perfect sense, right? If everyone finds out that we're getting, you know, $1,500 more a month, right? We're already competing with folks that work in big tech that make, you know, six figures and more, and landlords are just going to raise the rent. So everybody else that's not getting any sort of adjustment, now they can't find housing, right? We have crossed over to the other side, and we're now harming another group of people that's already harmed. So the challenge here is to use our leverage to get, yes, a better income, better cost of living for ourselves, and benefits to not downplay the work that we do. But also, how do we think about those other groups? Like Jesse said, the janitors, homeless people, or people on the brink of homelessness, which do include students, because ultimately the landlords and what they ask for in the rent, that's where the problem should be attacked as well. And because the university as an entity has so much leverage of what the landlords utilize for their income, they have the power to just say, hey, you know, we're going to tell our students we're going to make more on-campus housing or lower the rent or something so that you landlords you're not going to get our people. Or, you know, I mean, it's not a simple solution. It's going to take time. And, you know, as Jesse said, it's probably sounding really radical, right? It's crazy. Like it's like, okay, you said you wanted better rights and now we're going to give you some, but now you're saying you care about this other group. And so it's like success in this COLA movement means not screwing another group over by your advancement. So I would say that. And also just, you know, even if they don't necessarily give us everything, but at least more acknowledgement and wiggle room with the work that's expected of us.
And Veronica, did you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I would complicate the sort of like if we get COLA, then it's harmful to other groups. Although I can understand where that's coming from. I think ultimately the issue is not just our income, but also the rental market. And I agree with Amanda on so many of these points that it's the university's responsibility to address the housing crisis, because the university has contributed to it in ways that, you know, other forces haven't. Like the city has repeatedly tried to restrict enrollment for UCSC, whereas UCSC is committed to enrolling thousands and thousands more than we currently have. I think 10,000 more within a 10-year span, which now with the pandemic, I'm not even sure where we're at, but maybe sometime like in the next 5 years or something. So the university is responsible in that way to sort of flooding the rental market with low-wage renters that ultimately are going to have to couch surf or double, triple, quadruple up in rooms, or live in their car or abandon their dreams of being at the university. So the university is responsible for their enrollment numbers. They're responsible for the rent that they charge for board on campus, which is incredibly high. I know that family student housing, I believe it's close to $2,000 per month now. I know my take-home paycheck is maybe around $2,300. So you think about, like, if I had children, imagine I was a single mother with children, as many graduate students are. That's not wholly unusual. That they are getting pushed out because the university knows how much they pay us and they know how much they charge us for rent. And they are deciding who gets to be successful in graduate school by making those numbers too close together. We need rent control in Santa Cruz. Obviously, we had the failed campaign in 2018 because of statewide money that came into Santa Cruz to convince people that rent control was just going to ruin everything. It's not. We need rent control. We need landlords sort of under control in Santa Cruz, and we need higher wages. It has to be all of them together. But you could take it one step at a time if you have to. I mean, we need more housing. We need landlords under control. We need the university under control, and we need higher wages.
Can I mention something that I've been really pushing for? So as we're moving into budget negotiations, it's going to be the researchers, the TAs, and the postdocs who are hopefully all going to be able to sit down at the table together. One thing that I would really love to see is that our wages be tied to the local rent, so that we have to get paid such that our the local rent environment is only a third of our pay, and part of why I think that would be my favorite way to actually get the cost of living adjustment is because the University of California is gigantic and powerful. They're the largest employer in the state of California, way above and beyond everybody else. I think that just the hospital in San Diego is like the third largest employer in the state of California. So they're huge. And what I would love is if the University of California had a vested interest in reining in landlords. If we could just pass, an empty house law, something like that, where if you're holding a property empty, let's say you're some company in Arizona and you have a bunch of properties and you're holding them empty so that you can drive up prices. If you were going to be taxed on those empty units, well, that wouldn't be a good strategy. And so housing could actually, come down in a natural kind of logical manner. And so I would love for University of California to be in the fight about housing because it's going to cost them money. And so that's one of my favorite ways that I've heard to get our pay up is to tie it to rent so that they have a vested interest in getting it down.
Okay, cool. Thanks, y'all. Moving on to our next question. For our listeners who might want more resources or just what resources would y'all recommend that our listeners maybe check out if they're interested in potentially building a student movement? And Jesse or Amanda, either one, which one of y'all would like to start off first?
I'm not really sure. I'm interested to hear what resources everyone else has.
Okay,
I
cool.
would say the resource that I would think of is that, your community, that, building community, respecting the fact that you have connections with people and that might be useful. So maybe somebody who hasn't really been involved, but you've talked with them before, you've talked about other things. Maybe it's time to have a conversation with them about this issue that you're that you're wanting to get more involved in. I don't know that I have a good answer for that. I'm excited to hear everyone else's answers.
Amanda, would you like to share next?
Sure. I think that there's two approaches that I think of when I think of resources. One is, self-awareness and really being on top of knowing what you can do. So don't bite too much more than you can chew. Don't overcommit yourself, but still find a way to be committed. And when you do show up very, show up bravely and openly, right? be aware of the full spectrum of responses that you'll get, and that's okay. And look for other leaders to take cues from and to work together with, and just having just inserting the topic into conversation as often as you possibly can as well. That's also really useful, because oftentimes something that happens is this whole silo effect, right? So like there are these little pockets of people all over that care about this, but it's just hard to get them all connected. And once you have more conversations about it, you'll say, oh yeah, my other friend over here was talking about that. I'm going to put you in touch, or say, oh, can you put us in touch? And then that way you can, build the movement, and also use your social media, right? It's a tool. You can use it. And I think it's really powerful.
And Veronica, do you have anything you'd like to share?
Yeah, I mean, I think similar is sort of relying on community. I think for building a movement, there are kind of two groups that you can think about. It's those who are not already organized, but are interested in getting involved. And I think at this time, I would really encourage people to get involved in different student organizations that are doing activist or organizing work on campus. I am always impressed by ANAKBAYAN and GABRIELA, who are two different groups that organize around Filipinx liberation on our campus. I think they're really incredible organizers. And if somebody's not already involved in organizing, they're a good group to get involved with. The Black Student Union, or ABC, I think their name has sort of evolved over the last couple of years, but they had a very successful campaign, maybe 2015, where they had occupied Kerr Hall, and they had, I think, maybe all of their demands met. So getting involved in some of these groups that already have sort of like organizing frameworks can be a great way to like get your feet wet. And then for groups that are already sort of organized, or like organizing groups, I would say the best thing to do is to make people feel welcome and like they're a part of a community, and that, you may be like down to business trying to get some needs or demands met. But the other piece of like human relationships is so critical to the success of these movements, especially if you're able to like catch fire like COLA sort of did, is to make sure when people are new and interested, do whatever you can to bring them in and keep them feeling comfortable and good. Uncomfortable in the ways that we all have to sort of challenge ourselves, but comfortable in the sense that they're part of a group, of a community. So yeah, I think it's very similar to the other speakers. I think community is critical, whether you're trying to find it or you're trying to keep it.
Cool. And for our listeners that would like to become more involved with COLA or the Student Researchers Union, is there any like social media or anything that you recommend that they check out? Because I believe there might be some things happening soon.
Can we give you links afterwards to put underneath? Okay, cool. Yeah. So, UAW student researchers, there's, I don't know, Facebook and Instagram, whatever you, Twitter, there, we're out there. We're out there online.
COLA started with the Instagram at Pay Us More UCSC, which is a good one to follow. I know that's activity on there is starting to pick up again as things are starting to become in person again. I would say that's a good group to follow. Yeah, I mean, all of these groups, the postdocs, the graduate student researchers, and the TAs are all about to go into negotiations. So it's a good time to sort of keep an eye out.
Okay.
I did think of one more. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Coming up with the last one. So the group that I started going to Sacramento and organizing with, I think they're called the Student Union. I could be wrong. But it was just, I got an email from someone that was like, hi, do you want to get involved with, advocating for student needs? And, Trump had just gotten elected and I was upset and I volunteered for something. And then months later, they were like, "Hi, you have to go to this conference," and I was like, "No, I've got quals coming up. I'm too busy." But I went, and I'm glad that I did. So I would say one thing is, you can search out people who are doing stuff, especially if they're led by people of color. If they're led by people from the marginalized communities, good. And then also just be open to opportunities when they cross your path.
Okay, and I just wanted to add, with that in mind, and the sort of latter part of the question about getting involved in student organizing, I would check out GABRIELA SC, ANAKBAYAN. I think you can find them pretty easily on Instagram. I know I follow these on Instagram. UCSC BSU, you could follow Santa Cruz Mutual Aid, especially if you want to get involved in some of the organizing around homelessness, which affects many students and is sort of an issue related to the university. And then the Democratic Socialists of America, the DSA chapter in Santa Cruz, is pretty well organized and is another sort of like space where a lot of students do some organizing work. And, SubRosa. All of these are really great organizations to get involved in. If you're an undergrad and you're a tutor or a reader, you can also join the union. And so if you are that, or you think you will become that, or you have been that, you could check out uaw2865.org to sign a union card, or just email, I think it's Santa Cruz at uaw2865.org for more questions about how to get involved. And one of the representatives should be able to email you back.
Cool. Thank you all so much. And as we come to an end on today's episode, I want to extend another thank you to our amazing guests, Amanda, Jesse, and Veronica, as well as a thank you to Abby, Cameron, Kaz, Sam, Yu Yao, and everyone else that has helped us out with this episode. If you enjoyed today's episode, please feel free to subscribe to our channel. All resources and materials that we just discussed will be linked in the description below. And for more Ethnic Resource Center resources, feel free to check us out on Facebook and Instagram. Thank you all so much, and happy potential organizing. Woo! Cool.
Thanks. Take care.